Welcome to Offplanet Radio. I'm Randy Moggins, and my guest this hour is Crystal Clark. And I'm kind of excited to talk to her. I have in my hand right now a book. It's called Who We Really Are 102, When Tomorrow Comes. And it is one of two books that Crystal has written. The first one is Who We Really Are 101, of course. And we're going to talk to Crystal tonight about sacred science and what she has as a vision for the healing of this world. Crystal, welcome to Offplanet Radio.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. As I just mentioned, I have your 102 book mainly because I couldn't get a copy in fast order of 101. So I've started reading this book, and I want to talk a little bit about it as we go on. The first thing I'd like to ask you is you do have a website, and that website is thesoulsociety.com. I want to ask you what the Soul Society is.
SOL actually stands for Students of the Law.
Okay.
That's what it stands for. And that was the ancient term for what I call the sacred science. It was known as the law. It's an umbrella term for all of the little teeny tiny codes and laws and rules and regulation that creation must observe to continue to create, regenerate, and uphold life.
And I'm assuming that we've strayed from that incredibly over, I don't know, how long a period. I mean, it seems like we live in a very unnatural place. It seems like we're alienated from our earth. It seems like we're alienated from ourselves. And it seems like we're veering even further and further away from what we would consider to be a natural type of existence.
That's very, very true. And once I realized what it was, I realized why we don't know it. Because all of the control that we see all around us requires on our ignorance. Because what ends up happening is we end up participating in our own demise because we don't understand how it works. And I think the other part of it that's really important also is that they've weaponized a lot of it, which is not good.
Where did this alienation begin? How did we stray? What was the source of this? And what are the symptoms?
Well, the symptoms, which we see all around us now, are disintegration, degradation, and disease and death. That's what you get. How far back it goes, I really didn't know myself until I did that show with James, and which I thought was amazing because we don't really have a true history. Yes, we don't really know how far back it goes, and it's really mind-blowing and mind-expanding when you have that understanding, because we think in terms of 10, 20, maybe 30,000 years, but I think that what we uncovered in that show, it began a very long time ago.
Just to give a little background, I understand that you kind of left a corporate career to pursue what you're doing now. Can you give us a little bit of a bio?
Sure. Well, I was in the corporate world like everyone else, working 80 hours a week. I was traveling a lot. I was making very good money. And I transferred to another location, and things really went downhill from there in terms of corruption. It became very, very difficult to continue to work for the same kind of people. I even switched careers, and it just got really, when you're in an environment like that, it's one thing if you feel like you can make a difference, but when you're in an environment that is so overwhelmingly corrupt, there's no reason to stay, right? You don't feel good about, taking money to enable corruption. And before that happened, in the year 2000, a friend of mine asked me to go see a psychic. And I went, and this psychic woman told me all kinds of very, very strange things. And I didn't take it very seriously. I left, and I didn't think about it for 2 or 3 years until all of these other things happened. And she had actually told me my future 6 years in advance, which I didn't know until time passed. And so when I started to go through this phase, my family and I made the choice for me to stop working and pursue something more meaningful which at the time I was the breadwinner, so I'm sure you can imagine that's a difficult choice for a family. You have to downsize.
Yes, very much so, yeah.
It's very, very hard. And then I remembered what that woman said, because one of the things she said to me is that I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was supposed to be a writer and a healer. So I thought, okay, well, I'll consider that. And I had an awful lot of time on my hands, and I started reading a lot. And I started to see some connections here and there, and I thought, well, maybe I'll write a book about that. But that felt hollow, because you want it to be meaningful in some way. And so then I really just started asking in meditation, help me out here. What am I supposed to write about? And I went through a period that lasted almost 9 months where I was getting information in my dreams, which even that is really an oversimplification, because in terms of how many actual visual dreams did I have where I got information, there were very, very few. But I know that at night when I was going to sleep, I was learning things. And it's sad that it took 9 months, I know, but it was like somebody was dumping this puzzle, all of the pieces at once.
Well, no, I actually find the 9 months rather interesting, because it sounds like a gestation period.
That's true. I've never thought of it that way. That's true.
You were birthing something.
I was, yes. That's very, very true. It took me a very long time to really put it all together, but once I did, I thought, there was just that moment where I thought, oh my God, that's what this is. These are the principles of creation. This is the way it works. And it was really beautiful, but it was also very, very disturbing, because in that moment I recognized what it is we have done to our future and our planet.
So you've essentially had a dark night of the soul.
Very much so, yes. Yes, it was very, very hard to confront, but that's the thing. If you really want change, you have to admit what's broken. You can't fix it if you don't admit that it's broke. And that's very much where we're at. The weaponization was a big concern of mine from the beginning, because there are so many different ways that they do it. And this was well before the Gulf of Mexico and Fukushima. So now I'm much more concerned. I mean, at the time that the first book came out, I thought, well, the fork in the road is coming. And if we can get enough people to understand what's really happening and reverse it, we'll be okay. But it didn't happen, and now we're at the fork. We're definitely there. It came a lot sooner than I thought it would.
When you say weaponization, can you give me maybe a little bit more specifics of what's been weaponized? What do you view as the weaponization that's being turned against us?
Well, there are a few different ways to explain it. I think one of the easier ways to explain it is that creation is very much like computer programming. If we look at it in terms of a virtual reality program, and I don't use that term lightly in the sense of it's not real, so don't worry about it. I just mean it in the sense of understanding the code, if we want to look at it through computer codes. Everything is coded very specifically to interact with everything else in very specific ways. And when you begin to alter those codes, life, because this is the code for life, then life begins to break down. And when you look at something like a vaccine, for example, you're literally being injected with the virus. Well, if you inject your computer with a virus, what happens? It goes in, it reprograms the code, and it doesn't function anymore. And that's the other part of it. They have to know how it works in order to weaponize it, if you understand what I mean.
Yes, I do.
Yes, and there's many ways. GMOs are another way. HARP is another way. Frequency weapons, all of those things are altering the codes that we depend on for life. And at some point, if you look at that in terms of your computer, you're going to get to a point where maybe if you just altered a little bit of code in your programming, you might have glitches, but it will still run. But you can get to a place where you cross a threshold and the system crashes. And I think what many people are beginning to realize is that the people that whatever word we want to use, shadow, cabal, whatever, are in their insane move to depopulate the earth, are going to crash the program, and I don't think they realize it.
In some of your writings, going through your website, you are talking about some things that are very similar to what James Horak and I have talked about, and the things that you and James have talked about in that wonderful interview that you guys did together. I think that was, 3-hour interview?
Yes.
Yeah, and one of them is basically the split brain. And you talk on your website about the hemispheres, and you talk about the hemispheres not just of our brain, but even of our planet. So you kind of tie together the human creation with our host, with our mother, with the source that we live upon.
Yes, I think that's very important. In the book I do use the proper term that the ancients used, which was the one law. During shows, I prefer not to use that term, and I do begin to move away from that term in the book also because the word one doesn't mean anything. People don't know what that means. If you don't know what the two halves of the whole are, what good is to tell people that it's whole, right? And that's the problem. So I call it the sacred science because the sacred half really represents the soul, the feminine, the left brain, the subconscious, love, what we call the higher self. And also, if you apply this to technology, you'll find that it deals with integration, or what some people refer to as implosion. And then the science half of the sacred science is male, right brain, the material self, the conscious mind. It's tied up with logic and reason, and also deals with disintegration and explosion. And what's interesting about that is that more and more people are beginning to realize that a patriarchal society is not just about women. It's about leaving out the other entire part of the self and the understanding that this part has in all of creation. All of creation uses these same two energies.
Yes.
When we are imbalanced, we express that outwardly. And of course, all of our technologies now, especially in war, are based on explosion and disintegration. There are some really great technologies that go the other way, that don't cause damage, they don't cause heat death. Of course, the Big Bang is another misconception in terms of explosion. We're missing the other half of the equation. So anytime we have science that does not have a sacred purpose, that is the path of error, and it always has the same outcome. It will never be any other way.
I know when you mention a patriarchal society, a male-dominated society, I see the men. I do see you guys out there. I'm one of you. And how difficult that is to grapple with from the male perspective. And it's something I went through for about 2 years, very recent 2 years, of recognizing what I then called the sacred feminine to me, because I was approaching it from the standpoint that we had what we call deity or God or source or one or whatever you want to call it, but it was imbalanced. It was like Mars without Venus. It was like non-integrated to the point where it was so totally dominant that it was just devouring everything around itself. And for me, that was an epiphany. That was a pullback to begin to re-examine my own spiritual beliefs. How does that play into what you're talking about in terms of rebalancing?
Well, there's a huge misconception, and I really empathize with the men over this right now, that the return of the sacred feminine has to do with women being in charge. And this is not the case. It has to do, first and foremost, with the imbalance in the individual. You know, like men, for instance, don't recognize feelings. They're not very verbal about it. You know, we see the man hug, the quick pat, and they move on. Because they've been trained.
Yeah.
They've been trained. I mean, that's part of exploiting split consciousness, is not to have a relationship with the other part of yourself that does love people and that does care and that does want to be soft and not cruel. And when that imbalance begins in the individual, their behavior reflects it. And of course, it's that age-old adage, as within, so without. Truer words are rarely spoken. Mm-hmm. It's very, very true. So I think that's a big part of it. And somebody asked a really great question on chat, and I don't remember if you got to ask it with James a moment ago or not, but they asked something in regards to what is the higher self. That's something that James, yes, that's something that James actually helped me understand, because the subconscious mind is what we are calling the higher self. That's what it is. So it's really important that we regain an understanding of these two, because they're natural forces. All of creation is based on what we term male and female energy, but they work together. It's like, for example, you could say that heat is a male energy, and you could say that cold is female, but if you don't combine those two, you don't get wind. And if you don't get wind, you don't get seeds blowing around, and you don't get the proper kind of weather. These two things have to work together. Whenever you leave one out, you get problems. And of course we see that even now. You have people that will say, action, 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 all we need to do is take action. And then you have people on the other side that will say, no, all we need to do is sit around and meditate. Well, that's another mirror of the split consciousness, because I can tell you honestly that whenever I would meditate, I would be given information that would give me what I needed to know to do something about it, you see.
Yes.
So we're always stuck in one or the other, and we see that with politics. You either have the left wing or you have the right wing, but if you think about it, have you ever seen a bird fly if the two wings don't work together? So it just doesn't make any sense.
So the higher self then is within us, that fractal sort of the creator, the original source. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think the way that creation is fractal, I think it helps to explain with an alphabet. Although if you could imagine that these are musical notes, we could say. So every creation is like a recipe, and it requires all of these different things. Everything is co-creating everything else. That's the most important connection to answer your question very basically. We are also affecting creation, obviously, if we look at Fukushima and the Gulf of Mexico and our politics. So we are obviously affecting it that way, but we don't understand all of the connections. If we could understand it in principle, we could make more connections. So in this sense, in terms of creation being a recipe, we could say that the alphabet are the base codes, and they don't really do anything. And this is the really tiny scale. We could say that on their own, they don't really have that much of an effect. But when you combine certain letters, you get a word. And now you've moved up the scale, one notch on the fractal scale of creation. And now if you take a bunch of words and you string those together, you get a sentence. You've moved up the scale again. And then you take a bunch of sentences, you put those together, you get a paragraph. Paragraphs become chapters, chapters become books, and then you have libraries, and it goes on and on and on. It's generally, in that sense, the same principle. What we don't know down here is, what does it take, each creation, what does it need to continue to create, regenerate, and uphold life? And if people knew that, we wouldn't have the kind of degradation and control that corporations have over us. And genetically modified food is a great example of that, because if people understood that even our food is like a code that we ingest, and that our body is designed to accept that code. When we alter it, we're altering ourselves. We're altering the program, and everything starts to break down. It's the same thing with fluoride, with vaccines. All of these things are altering the original codes, and if we continue to do that, we're obviously going to have a system failure. What concerns me is that, especially this green movement and the carbon taxes, because people know there's a problem, but they don't know what the problem is. If you go to a person and you say, "Hey, we can feed all of the starving people on this planet with GMOs," they'll go, "Yay, let's go get some GMOs." But they're being duped into participating in their own demise because they don't know what you and I are talking about. And they purposefully don't know.
Well, you raise an interesting point, and what I'm thinking here is that because the GMO is really, I guess, a symptom of a larger disease, because, again, we're so far removed from original self. We moved away from an agricultural economy. I grew up in a small town. I grew up near my grandparents' farm. I grew up in a time when people did still farm, raised their own food. The food was relatively healthy. We knew where it came from. Today there's a complete detachment in terms of what we consume, because we go to a store and we throw it in a cart and it's packaged and we take it up and we have it scanned and we take it home and we microwave it. But this was not the way things were done even 50 years ago. And the same thing is true, I believe, in terms of how we consume. There's no sacredness to it. There's no sense of wholeness in it, because spiritually it's devoid, and so therefore we don't even honor our own bodies by making what we partake sacred. Is that sort of what you see as this construct?
I would say that that's a big part of it, but again, the perpetuated ignorance of making sure people don't know what it takes to create, regenerate, and uphold life is a big part of it, especially when you get to the point that you realize the most profitable business that this planet has ever seen right now is death. And it doesn't matter what part of our lives you apply it to. Look at cancer patients. Are they really interested in curing cancer? Where's the money in that? Look at pharmaceuticals. Are they really interested in healing people? Where's the money in that? Look at war. Are they really interested in peace? Where's the money in that? So they're making insane amounts of money. They're profiting off of genocide while at the same time, and that's very, very disturbing. This new, the carbon tax issue, I can't even begin to tell you how much that disturbs me. People are upset because they know that our planet is having serious problems, but they don't know what the real problems are. So again, it's very much that same situation. When you don't really know, people can tell you anything they want, and you buy it.
Well, I guess the question with the carbon tax is, who collects it, who gets to use it, and why are we paying the same people that screwed the planet up in the first place? If we could just go back and we look at the paradigm for a minute, where did most of this destruction come from? It comes from this period of time in the mid to late 20th century, when we ramped up our industrialization programs, when we were polluting on mass scale, and then going into this present era, a lot of destruction being done by nuclear. Fukushima is a great example of that. But I mean, I live near 3 Mile Island. That memory is very intact in my system, the reality of what we were doing using nuclear power. And I said this in a show that I did last night. We've made bad choices as humanity, or we have been conditioned to make bad choices.
That's it right there.
Okay. We turned down Tesla. We went to Edison. Why do we have overhead power lines when we could have had power that would have flown through the air the way Tesla imagined it, and an extraordinary technology, zero-point energy, all of the things that would have given us the ability to produce on a scale that did not pollute and did not deplete ourselves economically or in terms of resources.
Yes, that's very, very true, but you really hit the nail on the head. We have been conditioned to think a certain way. There are other choices, but we have not been told what those other choices are, because those choices will set us free. We could eliminate disease. We could clean up our planet. You see, these are all profit centers. And money is a problem because you can't eat it, you can't drink it, and you can't breathe it.
Thank you. You went right where I wanted you to go.
Yes, but because we have accepted it by people who pushed it on us, we have now allowed people who have the most money to buy life and buy the rights to it and then sell it back to whomever they want at whatever price they determine. And that's the problem. You know, if you look at these storms, again, this is another issue because, you know, people are freaking out about all of these terrible storms. Oh, it's global warming. No, it's not. It's HAARP. They bet on it in the stock market. They're betting on death. They're betting on destruction because they make money off of it. And at the same time, as far as they're concerned, well, they're getting rid of some of the other people on the planet. And that, you see, that really frustrates me because did you and I put Corexit in the Gulf of Mexico? Did you and I put fluoride in the water? Did you and I come up with GMOs? So you see who's in control of all of this. they're the ones who destroy everything, and then they turn around and say, well, it's our fault because we're not educated enough and there's too many of us on the planet. And the other issue with this is, for example, if you look at the bee problem, they finally discovered that it's a pesticide that Monsanto makes that's killing off the bees.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, Monsanto was trying to create a genetically modified bee that would be immune to it. So what does that say? It's the same thing with GMO food. They're trying to create a GMO food that will be resistant to aluminum. So you see, they're killing off everything natural. So that
while
they'll
they're
be the only ones
spraying
left
aluminous
to go to.
oxide into our atmosphere on a mass scale daily.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Agenda 21 is part of this. Codex is part of this. Going after small raw milk farmers. They don't want us to have access to anything that will keep us healthy, because death is where all the money is. It's a sad
Like
truth.
I said, you kind of went to the place that I wanted to go. In this book, Who Are We Really 102 When Tomorrow Comes, and I got this book maybe about a week ago, and I have to tell you, I'm reading it slowly because, first off, it's a work of fiction. It's not something I want to scan. And secondly, I'm actually enjoying it because, for me, this book is an experience in terms of kind of immersing in a culture that you paint in terms of this book. You paint the picture. First off, the book is about two timelines, and we probably maybe can weave that into the conversation. But in this book, there's a great evil that comes very early in the plot, and that evil has to do with really what we've been talking about, either directly or kind of off to the side in this whole conversation. It has to do with money.
That's true. It has to do with money, but also what I refer to as shadow. And
yes.
I use that term very specifically because again, if we understand the as within, so without connection, everything going on this planet is a shadow of ourselves, isn't it?
Right. And
so
that was
we
my
have to deal with that.
That was my other thought, because as you were talking, and we're talking about all this horrific stuff, and we say, this is what they do to us, and we've been conditioned, and yet I'm kind of arriving at a place, personally, where I go, but wait a minute, they are us. There is exactly what you just said here, the shadow side of all of this. So now we have a responsibility.
Yes, and that's what I found so really delightful about James, is that he's one of the other few voices out there that will constantly go back to self-responsibility. People don't want to talk about that. They want somebody else to come and fix it. But it is important that, there's the reason I wrote that book the way I did. They are two different books in one book, and you can read them in any order, but they do cross over into each other. But we have so many people just saying, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong? And that is important because we can't attend to a wound if we don't admit that it's real. We have to fix it, obviously. But then at some point, I think people need to begin to have a way to imagine a different future, a future that does not use money, a future that does not profit from death, a future where people are equal, where you can grow. What would that look like? And I think that's important because, there are a lot of really great technologies that are really kind of being used under the radar. I don't know if you're familiar with what John Hutchison did in the Gulf of Mexico. He used, in the old days they would call it alchemy. Maybe today we could call it applied harmonics. But
transmutation, yeah.
Yes, and it worked. Now, if we were able to use those technologies openly and broadly, I think that we could have, I think before things started piling up, I think we could have fixed it very, very, very quickly. But every time we alter more things and we cause more problems, we're getting closer and closer to a point where we are going to need outside help. And we will not get that if we have the kind of leaders that we have.
Yes. That actually seems to be the meme that's kind of rippling through this show tonight, and it's something that is popping up more and more. And it's the question that I've had as well, is why would an outside force help us unless we come to the place where we take responsibility and can also accept that help and learn from it so that we don't wind up regressing back into the same spin cycle that we wound up today.
That's very, very true. That's very, very true, because we won't learn anything. We won't grow. Suffering doesn't have to be part of the lesson, but it's a good way to learn. I mean, if that's the way you have to learn it, you'll learn the lesson. What we're being given is time to learn the lesson before it's permanent. That's what we're being given, and I think that we need to utilize that time, because they can only do so much. It's really up to us.
How much time do you think we have? I mean, based on what we see around us, the things that, I mean, I almost hate to look. I don't consume mainstream news a whole lot, other than what's around me. But I almost hate to look anymore to see what's next, what's happening. It almost seems like we're in this accelerated change cycle that's not good, that most of the news is bad, and it looks like we're ready. As you said, we are at the fork in the road. So where do we go from here?
We go wherever we collectively decide we want to go, and that's really the beauty of it, isn't it? It's not that we can't do it. It's that we have collectively chosen not to. And I see that changing. I think that some of this, my thoughts on this, were built into the storyline and the second timeline of that second book. I think that 2012 is a very important year in terms of more information coming out in ways that will really wake people up. But then it's kind of like, if you look at it from the perspective of, let's say, judgment. Let's look at it that way. Would it be fair to judge a person who did not know any better? Of course not.
No.
Well, this is the year that an awful lot of people are going to know better, whether they want to or not. And then we have to make a decision. How are we going to handle it? So I think this year is really important in terms of the information and things happening and coming out that are really undeniable in terms of the types of problems that we have. So in a way, I think that 2013 will be a little bit more important, because I think that's where the action is really going to start happening.
In terms of how this thing moves forward, and again, you talk about two timelines in this book, and because I haven't gone through it, I don't have the ability to grasp the whole concept. My concept of this is both a collective and individual consciousness, where we are making conscious decisions on a moment-by-moment basis. My decisions to be conscious, to be responsible, to transition into a higher realm of thinking, in some way are impactful to the mass consciousness. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, and that's how it starts. That's exactly how it starts. That's what has to happen, because it is a collective. There are 7 billion people on this planet, and the problems are big enough, and so many people are contributing, whether it's out of ignorance or out of bribery or whatever. Once we collectively realize where this path goes and decides to change it, it will change. But that's the only way it will change. I heard you say that you're going to do a show with Drake. I've been following that.
Yes.
I find it very, very encouraging. I've heard a lot of different plans that people have come up with, and what Drake has put together is the only one I've seen that I would actually support. So I really hope they're serious.
Yeah, there's a lot of skepticism out there. Let's say that there's a lot of cynicism out there, too. And I think there's a big difference. I noted this when I put a blog post up. The difference between a skeptic and a cynic is that a skeptic inquires openly about things, and a cynic basically pollutes the atmosphere with negativity. And we have enough cynicism now. We need open inquiry. We have a right to ask questions, and I think that journalist in me probably kind of wants to go in that direction. But at some point, we have to be able to assess things intuitively. I get the sense that you're an intuitive person, and I get the sense that you process information not exclusively but strongly biased or based on your right brain, intuitive, feminine perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's true. I've been able to do that most of my life. When I'm talking to a person, I didn't think I could do it over the internet for a while, and then it didn't take long before I could really do that. But you're connecting with a person in a way that in which words are not required. which is helpful because a lot of times, people will come to me for help or advice, but, we all have, there's only so much we want to share about a situation sometimes, and it's easy for me to be helpful because I can pick up on what they're not saying, which is very helpful. I've noticed a lot of times, for example, the psychic that I went to, I had written about her in the first book a little bit, and I was using the pseudonym of Margaret for her. And when I finished the book, I went back to her and I asked her if I could use her real name. And I picked a name that I thought would be completely opposite. And I told her I was using the name Margaret. Her name is Annie, and she told me that was almost her real name. So I think a lot of times, if we're really plugged in, I wouldn't go as far to say as it's a form of psychic ability, but I think that we can be really lucky guessers. But the left brain is also required because we do need to process the information also. Yes. But it's helpful, and I think more people should trust that part of themselves. It's not something to be feared. If you dream journals are great. If you have an idea about you feel a certain way about something, that this or that may happen, write it down, and then if it happens, check yourself. See what kinds of ways you're good at doing that. With some people, it's future events. With other people, it's just knowing what a person is thinking or feeling. But it's important because that's the other half that we've denied for so long.
Well, I thought it was interesting you said about you didn't think you could do that over the Internet. I've basically been based on the Internet in terms of broadcasting for about 7 years. And I've often said to people that there's a vibe that comes across, even in emails a lot of times, that I start to get a sense of who somebody is long before maybe I even get to know them personally or have a conversation with them. And it's kind of, again, it kind of goes back to this whole idea of the connectiveness, the field, the quantum effect, that when we allow ourselves to open up and tap into that, we become receptors of another form of information. And to me, it's really important to develop that because I came from a generation and from a family that were completely left brain, completely logical. Everything had to be proven. Everything had to be spelled out, linear, line by line, and it stifled me. I was not that kind of person. I was a right brain person. I was a creative person, and a lot of that was stifled. And I think there's a lot of people that are like that don't think they can do this, that don't think they can get to that next level.
Yes, there are a lot of people that aren't ready, I think. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of it too. We on the grander scale, we talked about how we are collectively choosing which way this goes, but we do that every day in our own personal life. When we are sure that we want to go a certain direction with our life, that's when we can really dial in on that phrase that the universe will conspire to make it happen. It's when we don't know what we want or we keep changing our mind that we run into problems. And I think it's very much that same way with this kind of thing. If people can't see the benefit to it, if they can't see it as a normal function, I think they're scared of it. I think they're afraid to use it in any meaningful way because they've shut it out for so long. We fear what we don't understand. But it's not scary. I mean, there's nothing bad about it. It's very, very helpful. I mean, it's saved my butt many times because I always knew when not to go certain places and bad things would happen. It's very helpful. And that's another thing too, in the second book there's a situation where a group of people move to a new kind of reality that's in the future. And some of those people are now coming back to help what they view as the past.
Yeah.
And I think that there are so many remarkable things that we could explore because so many of us have always believed that if you hear stories like this, a woman is stopped at a red light and she hears a voice telling her to lock her doors and she does it, and then somebody runs up and tries to carjack her. But, people being protected or getting messages, and we call those spirit guides and we call those angels. But is it really? Is it us coming back? Do we know? I mean, there's really a lot of remarkable things that we just have not had the chance to really explore because we become more and more trapped into existing instead of living. So the system that we're in right now is very stifling spiritually as well.
We live in a culture where if you talk about a future self, a parallel timeline, an alternate timeline, these are things that still kind of freak people out. And yet, I can tell you that I've experienced it, that I'm experiencing it more because I opened myself to it. This seems like we sit on a lunatic fringe right now rather than being what I would call the forerunners of the next level of consciousness for humanity. I don't see that humanity survives unless we develop, and when I say collectively, I guess we mean in a kind of a staged way. Like you said, Crystal, not everybody's ready for this, and I understand that. So that kind of wipes out the idea that there's going to be some mass ascension. But there is kind of a quantitative ramp up in terms of seeing consciousness expand. Would you agree with that? Is that what you're seeing as well?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's very, very critical to a lot of this. And, of course, a lot of the fear that people have goes back to having been taught for so long that the angels and demons they're looking for lie outside of themselves. And so when they do have a remarkable experience, immediately they wonder, well, was it evil? Was it an angel? Well, it doesn't really work like that. In terms of the awakening process, I think the one thing that I think really helps, because it is difficult if you ask people, what's the one thing that could unify all of humanity? It's obviously not religion, that's for sure.
No.
A lot of people would say love. Well, everybody has a different idea of what that means. Some people love their cars more than their wives or their kids, or money more than their kids. I mean, everybody has a different idea of what that means. But the fact is that every person on this planet wants to live. And if we could all meet on that common ground, we would get through this. We could start there. That's a good place. Everybody wants a future. I don't care who they are, 1% or 99%, they all want it.
I think most people want to live. I wonder if they want to live what I call abundantly. I wonder if they want the next level. I am restless. I'm a restless person. And, my family knows this. People who know me know this. I'm always pushing the boundaries because I'm not satisfied with where I am, and I'm really not satisfied with where humanity is. And it's a frustration. I'm, in a good way, kind of frustrated with the state of humanity and the state of this world. I think I'm angry in an appropriate way as to what's happening on this planet. So from your framework and based on what you've done in your work, how do we press the envelope? How do we just keep pressing this thing forward without bumping up against the wall of frustration?
Well, that has been my experience, is that if you can meet people on common ground, you find that you don't have nearly as many differences as you think you do, and it's much, much easier to work together for a common goal. I think that surviving our technology and those who abuse it is a very, very good common goal right now. If we can get past that, if we can all come together to do that, the rest will work itself out. It's natural for some people to go a little farther than others, a little quicker. And I don't know what your, quote unquote awakening experience was like, but I think it would be pretty ugly if we all went through it at the exact same time, because it's not easy. So it does make sense that it unfolds slowly, and that people get to work the kinks out in advance before you just have everybody jump on board. I think that makes sense. But what's pressing now for me, I look at life oftentimes through the lens of see a need, fill a need, and what is the need right now? The need is to make sure that we understand what it takes to create, regenerate, and uphold life so that it can continue on. If we can get the 1% to understand that, because we're not just educating the 99% when we do these shows. No. If we can get them to understand it, perhaps they'll come to understand that they won't survive it either. But survival, I think, right now has to be our primary objective, because we can sit around and meditate and contemplate forever, but if we don't fix what's happening, it will be a very short forever. Right?
Yeah.
So that has to come first. It's just a matter of squaring our priorities away and properly arranging them. And it's not, I'm at the place now where I want a new experience, and I can tell by the way you're talking that you also are ready for a new experience. And I personally know that I have a soul, and that this is a blip on my soul's radar. I love this planet, I love the people on this planet, and I would like to see them make it. If they make it, we get a new experience, don't we? We get to experience what that would be like collectively. If we don't, and the soul has to start over in a new program somewhere else, that is also a new experience. But I think that many of us are ready for a new experience simply because we love the people on this planet. We love this planet, and we know that this is not okay, and we're tired of watching it. It doesn't go anywhere. It's either forward or somewhere else. Those are our choices.
You kind of gave a 4-point thing there that starts with create. To you, what does create mean in terms of being proactive, of doing what you feel you need to do at this time? And the reason I'm asking that is because I see that you're very specific in your goals. I see that you're very defined in what you're writing and talking about. People need to have a starting point. So for somebody that's hearing this, for somebody who's in a transition, what does create look like? Where do they go with that? How do they go into themselves deeply and pull that out of themselves?
One of the most important things that I learned when I went through that period was that everything has a function. Everything is contributing in some way, or what we often refer to as co-creating. Everything is special. The trees are special. The grass is special. Every human being is very much like that. All of us came here to contribute something very, very specific. And it wasn't to go to work from 9 to 5 and make money. We all have something very unique and special that's joyful to us. For you, maybe it's your radio program. Everybody has something, though, and what I learned that really touched me was that because every person on this planet was meant to contribute that one special thing to the collective, that if they don't do it, the collective suffers for it. People are not insignificant in their offerings. So I would say, what is their passion, and how can people benefit from that? Because we all benefit from it in the end. It's really a beautiful feedback loop.
Yeah, following the passion, as opposed to being socialized into the norms of a culture that says you need to do this or be that because you need to make X number of dollars and have this position in society, and you're kind of, I guess, conform to that. And I see this with a lot of people, and I see it scarily enough right now with the younger generation, and I said that when I was young. I fought against that conformity thing, but I see now that this present generation, because of the economic situation, are really conforming mainly out of fear.
Well, again, that goes back to the all of the wonderful problems that money brings us, because money is very much like a drug, and once you get people addicted, the fastest way to control them is to take it from them, and that's where we're at. We became so dependent on it that we lost because money doesn't grow on trees for a reason, right?
Right.
We lost that realization. So we need to get back to, what does it take to create, regenerate, and uphold life? If we can do that, where does money fit into that? It doesn't. I would like to see a future without money, which is why I wrote about it that way. I think it's important that people reprioritize what matters, because a lot of people really just don't know anymore. We can correct that. I think that all of the whistleblowers and people that are going to come out this year in whatever form, I think it will be a really wild year in that sense.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it, if you want the truth. I think it will be neat. That's going to help facilitate a lot of things. It's going to give a lot of people that push they need to get involved. So, yeah, whatever your passion is, find a way to offer it meaningfully to the collective in terms of what's needed at the moment, if you can. And obviously, what's needed, I would think, there's a big long list, but I think most of us would agree that they're the same things. Fukushima sizzling, the Gulf of Mexico has to be cleaned up. We need to fight for our right for organic food. We need to get rid of GMOs. The chemtrails have to stop. The list really, in that sense, there were, before Fukushima and the Gulf of Mexico, really about 4 or 5 major things that really needed to be stopped. Those have been added to the list, but by the same token, the healing technologies that we could and should be using would be very, very helpful all the way around. We just have to get to a place where somebody in a black suit doesn't show up at your house because you're trying to heal people. That's not okay.
Well, you talked earlier about James Hutchinson and alchemy in the Gulf. And it's like, why can't we practice that openly? Why can't we do energy healing on the street? Why can't we be doing these things that are part of, I guess, on a broad scale, you'd call it the shamanistic side of things? Is it because we're afraid? Is it because we don't feel comfortable doing it? Is it too woo-woo for the main segments of society? Why can't we do this stuff now?
Well, there are several different things that affect this particular problem, and one of them is that a lot of these technologies, in terms of healing, are also being weaponized. They can be used both ways.
Yeah.
And so there is the concern that they need to be monitored in that sense, which is a concern that I also share. I'm fine with people experimenting on a very, very small scale. I think work the bugs out on the small scale first. That's important. A lot of people, a lot of these technologies are also dealing with free energy. They don't want us to have free energy. So it is very spiritual, but it's also a very real science. And the people in control don't particularly want that cat out of the bag, or they'll lose their control. So it is difficult. We need to get to a place where life is more important than profit. That's the key. And all of these people in control, all they want to do is profit off of death. That's their motto. That's what they do. As long as they're in control of life and altering it the way they are, we're not going to have much of a future because that's what's so sad about it. How is it that 7 billion people on this planet have let maybe 10,000 people wreak so much havoc and not done anything about it? How is that okay?
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. So what maybe that tells us, Crystal, given this tiny little number of controllers, is we need to get a critical mass on our side of that scale, because it's very clear that humanity tips on a very small number of people who are capable of operating in a persuasive manner and with great power.
Well, critical mass, I think it will be a little bit more important later, and this year will help. The problem is, Randy, and I'm sure you'll agree with this right away, let's say 1 million people wake up but don't know who's chemtrailing. How do you fix it? There are people that have very specific spheres of influence that you and I don't have. There are people who do know who these people are, and we need their help. I don't know who they are.
Yes.
I don't know where the control room is for HARP. I don't know. Most people on this planet don't.
The interesting thing to me, Crystal, is that we're like tapping on it right now. We're getting very close. We are seeing people who are coming up out of the power structure. And one of the things that I believe this year is that we will begin to see this. We will begin to see defectors. We will begin to see those who are going to give us some blueprints. I think that was the whole point of whistleblowers all along. I think it's been distorted mainly because there's a fascination with all of this stuff, and people have gotten carried away with the fascination of the details rather than understanding, look, there's information here that's going to guide us in a way that we can begin to move on the outside edges of this thing so that ultimately we can understand it, and then we can begin to go against it.
Yes, I mean, people are caught up into the flavor of the month club. They want novelty. Well, look, if I thought novelty would fix Fukushima, I would spend all of my time in novelty as well. It won't. proper information, and then people acting on that information will fix Fukushima. I think the kind of whistleblowers that we're going to see this year are going to be very, very helpful in that sense, because again, it's just our spheres of influence don't have that kind of reach. I don't rub shoulders with the Rockefellers or any of these other people, but the people that do, if we can reach them, and courage is contagious. It really is, especially when you're under this kind of pressure, right? Because you know what the outcome will be if you don't do something about it. The excuse that, well, I need to feed my family, so I'm going to keep creating bioweapons, doesn't really fly anymore when you realize that those same people are going to kill you and your children and your planet anyway if you don't come out and say something. This will be the year of the beginning of no more excuses, and that's critical, I think, especially with people that are in very key positions. I think we'll see a lot of it. I look forward to it.
I like that. I like that a lot. We're kind of bumping up on running out of time here, and so what is the future for you? Are you going to do another book? Do you have some projects on tap? Give us a little bit about where you're headed.
I am actually. I started the third book some time ago, but I took some time off, and I've been working with James a lot. It was an absolute pleasure to get that series out. I do want to get back to writing, though, because that's the other thing too that we have to recognize, is that we don't really know how far the ripples travel of what we personally do, and it can take some time because there's movement under the water first. So, but if we really understand who we are and why we're here and what we're supposed to do, I think we just have to be patient and keep plugging along at it. So I do want to get back to writing, but I really enjoyed working with James.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great. I'm going to repost that video. I think I may have put a link up at one point, but I went through that whole series, and I have to say that the two of you working together, you pulled information from each other in an interesting way. You really did, in that particular audio and what I guess was a YouTube video as well, create a cosmology, a framework that we can work from. The information that James has brought out for, as long as I've known him is, let's face it, it goes completely against the grain, as I believe your work does as well.
In a sense, and that's what's so interesting about it, because knowing that my focus is trying to teach people what does it take to create, regenerate, and uphold life, isn't that what James also is teaching? But he's working at a broader level in terms of, if you looked at it in a fractal sense, he's working with the solar system. I'm trying to work down here with smaller systems, but it's all connected. I think James is a wonderful human being. I'm grateful that he's here, and I'm grateful for the information that he shares, because it's time for people to know the truth, because it's the other choice. It's the choice that they've never been given. And I think that's what's so detrimental to change psychologically, is that people don't think there is any other choice, that there is any other reality, that there is any other way to live. But that's not the case. That's never been the case.
Well, I can tell you that having begun journeying into Who We Really Are 102, you present a pretty compelling roadmap for something as a means to begin to see a future that I think many people have never stopped to consider. And I thank you for that. I look forward to talking to you again, especially after I finish this book, because I think we'll have more to talk about. I'm very interested in how this all plays together with some of the other information that I've looked at on your website. And again, give your website out.
It's www.thesoulsociety.com, and that's TheSolSociety.com. And James's website is emvsinfo.blogspot.com.
Crystal, it's been wonderful talking to you, and I'm looking forward to having you back again sometime very soon to talk about more as you progress. I guess that's going to kind of wrap it up for this show. Anything else you want to say?
Oh, just thank you very much for the invitation. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.